It's time for the chip race.
For strategy this week, we welcome one of the game's top players. He is the 2018 Super High Roller Bowl champion. He is the great and good Isaac Haxton. Mike, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Well, to the hand, it is a cash game spot. It comes from Poker After Dark. I believe it was Rumble with Jungle Week. And as usual on Poker After Dark, it was a 6-max game. The villain is Brining Rast. The blinds are 300, 600, and you have straddled to 1200. Okay, let's get into it. From the hijack, playing roughly 192k, 320 big blinds, or maybe more relevant here, 160 straddles. Rast makes it 3,800 six ways with the Ace of Hearts, Jack of Diamonds. Action folds around to you, Ike, with the Queen of Clubs, 10 of Spades. Playing approximately 217k, 360 big blinds, or 180 straddles, you decide to call the extra 2,600. Not much to analyse there, but before we get to the flop, maybe this is a good moment, like, to get your take on Rast. He's obviously a super successful player, but I think it's fair to say that he plays a bit less poker these days in an immensely tough lineup. Polk and Kuhn and obviously Jungle Man are there too. Would he have been perceived as the spot?
I don't know about the spot. I think, probably the perception is that he's not quite as strong an element player as the four of us. There was also Berkey in the lineup. I mean, he's very good. He's done very well at a variety of poker games. These days, he's more of a mixed game player. At that time, I think he was beginning to play more mix, but also not too far off from having played a whole bunch of No Limit in Macau with great results. And he's done well in No Limit tournaments too. He's a good player.
Okay, so I'm taking it from that you think Polk is the spot then.
Of course.
Well, to the flop, the pot is 8,500 and it comes the 10 of Hearts, 5 of Spades, 3 of Diamonds. IQ check and Brining Rast c-bets to 4,500. You make the call. Again, not a huge amount to see here. I'm sure I would have done the same. To the turn, the pot is 17,500 and it comes the 9 of Spades. So the board now reads 10 of Hearts, 5 of Spades, 3 of Diamonds, 9 of Spades. The action goes check, check. I can almost now hear our audience going, what the fuck, this hand is super boring and standard. Well, I promise you it eventually gets interesting. But for the sake of giving, all the proper considerations to all the possible options, Ike, would you ever consider donking this spot? The 9 perhaps makes it slightly more your board now.
No, I wouldn't. I make 2 pair on that card a little bit more often than he does, but that is by far outweighed by the fact that all of his semi-bluffs on the flop with 2 overcards now pick up gut shots and open-enders. And I would guess that turn is not especially favorable for me. I'm really hoping to see a card 7 or lower, or a board pair, I think are the turns that are relatively favorable for me and that might get some consideration for leading. Really just the board pairs, though. The 7, 6, 4, 2 are not bad news, but I doubt they get leads. The board pairs may get some leads.
Okay, to the good bit. On the river, the pot is still 17,500 and it comes the Jack of Hearts. The final board reads 10 of Hearts, 5 of Spades, 3 of Diamonds, 9 of Spades, Jack of Hearts. Ike, you check and Rast bets 11k. Would you ever consider going for a thin value bet here, maybe using a blocker sizing?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's probably quite close whether I should bet or check. I looked at this hand a little bit before the episode myself, and it depends on how he's constructing his flop strategy a bit. He bet like half pot, I think, which is kind of putting it right in the marginal territory for whether or not my hand is good enough to value bet the river. If he had bet third pot on the flop, it clearly is. And if he had bet like 75% pot or more, it probably is not. And then when he's betting half pot, it's probably going to depend on whether that's the only size he's using on the flop, or if he has 2 or even 3 bet sizes that he's using, and whether there are bigger or smaller ones available to him. I think it ought to be quite close. And yes, betting a small size there certainly looks like a reasonable play.
Well, Dara, finally getting you in here. Rast goes for the 2/3 size. What do you think of this bet? And I suppose more specifically, the sizing. And what do you think of Ike's check?
Yeah, I think you can definitely make an argument for block betting, and the solver bears that out, but checking is obviously fine as well. I think Rast has a very clear bet on the river, and the sizing seems fine. And then when we flip it back to Ike, this was probably the most interesting point, because as I said to Ike before we started recording, I do remember watching this hand live at the time, and a lot of the people I was watching were really surprised by the river check raise. They were like, what is that? Is it value or is it a bluff? It wasn't widely understood back then that hands which can win at showdown if it goes check, check, but won't win very much when the imposition player bets, are actually very good hands to turn into bluff check raises, particularly if they have a board pair that blocks strong hands on this board.
Well, after Rast puts in the bet of 11k, the raise does come in from Ike. It's possible, I suppose, Ike, that your hand could be good sometimes, but instead you decide to utilise the blocker value of your holding, which, like Dara just said there, you block 2-pair combos and straights, and you make it 60k, 49k more to Rast, who ultimately tank calls. Dara, we talk a lot about blockers on this show. Clearly, Ike has chosen the right type of hand and has certainly put Rast in a really tough spot. What does the solver think of the raise and Rast's call?
It thinks the raise is profitable, but it prefers to just call, because I guess it feels that the call is more profitable. And that's the solver playing against itself, where the imposition player is bluffing at the right frequency and is not over bluffing or under bluffing, and is going to fold the right hands to the check raise. I guess the most interesting thing for me looking at the solver outputs was that Rast's hand is a pure fold in solver land. It is just kind of a bad bluff catcher. It's losing to all the value and it's only beating bluffs, but it's pretty close, to be honest. I think follow the money is kind of good logic in life, and follow the EV is good logic when you're looking at solver output. You can be a little bit dogmatic when you're looking at solver output and go, well, it says call, so it's always a call, or it says fold, so it's always a fold. But you have to remember, first of all, that the solver is just a toy game. It's based entirely on the ranges and sizes that you've given it. But secondly, you also have to just look at the EV of the different actions. And they're so close in this case that you could probably tweak the assumptions in some small way, which would actually make the call correct.
Well, like, how much consideration did you give to just calling? I guess that's sort of maybe the first thing that comes into your head when you face that bet. And then I suppose what tipped you over into deciding on the more aggro line?
I'm fairly certain that in game, what I decided was that I had a hand that should never fold and should mix calls and raises. And I explicitly randomized to choose a raise. That's what I would guess looking at the hand today, and I'm pretty certain that's what I thought at the time. Call is a very reasonable play, I think. Dara has said that in his outputs it was a pure call by a little bit, but I had classified it as the type of hand that is mixed call or raise.
I want to give you the final word on this one, Ike, as well. Obviously, we don't live in GTO land, and even elite players such as yourself are out there battling, I guess, using heuristics learned from similar spots you may have come across. You're applying concepts in real time as best you can. The solver thinks your call pre is fine. It takes your flop and turn actions most often, but on the river, it prefers to block bet and thinks that your raise, while profitable, makes a little less sense than just calling. The other important factor is your opponent is not a solver and so is perhaps vulnerable to exploitation. Do you think Rast's tendencies might have given you a greater reason to take the line that you did?
Not especially. I did not, if I remember correctly, think during this hand that I was trying to make any exploitative deviations. I was just trying to play the hand like a computer. I didn't have any good ideas about why I ought to deviate in this spot. So if I missed the computer output by a little, then I think I made a mistake.
Well, while I know what you mean by that, I think it would be extremely harsh to call it a mistake. It has been a fascinating hand with you, so rich with concepts I'm sure our audience appreciates. Dara, thank you as always.
Thank you, David.
And Mike Haxton, thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been fun.